"Dad, starting with your next paycheck, we're transferring all your money to my account." Those were the words my son Malik spoke to me that Thursday afternoon while drinking coffee in my kitchen. He said it as if he were proposing something completely normal, as if he were doing me a favor, as if I were incapable of managing my own money at 68 years old. I stared at him. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just searched his eyes for an explanation. Why my own son, the boy I raised alone, the man I fed with the sweat of my brow, was asking for total access to my bank account. But I found nothing. I only saw that calm smile, that confidence of a person who knows he's in control. So I took a deep breath and told him yes, that it seemed fine, that I trusted him. Malik's smile widened. He stood up, gave me a quick mechanical kiss on the forehead, one of those kisses that mean nothing, and told me it was for the best. He said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing, that he'd take care of everything, that it was for my own good. Those words, "for my own good," floated in the air long after he'd left my house. That very evening, like every Friday, Malik came back, not alone, but with his wife, just as he always did. He arrived expecting me to have dinner ready, the table set, hot and free food waiting for them, as had been the routine every Friday for the past 3 years. I heard them arrive. I heard their footsteps at the entrance. I heard the key I'd given him turning in the lock. I heard the door open, and then I heard the scream. It was a high-pitched, desperate sound, the scream of someone who'd just seen something they never expected to see, the cry of someone realizing things weren't going to be the way they thought. I remained seated in my chair in the empty kitchen, in the empty house, listening to that scream echo against the walls. I didn't move. I didn't go to see what was happening. I already knew what was happening. Malik rushed into the kitchen. His face was pale, his eyes wide open. His wife followed him with the same expression of shock and disbelief. "Dad," Malik yelled. "Dad, what did you do? Where is everything? Where's the furniture? Where's the TV? Where is everything that was here?" I looked at him calmly, with a self-possession I didn't know I had. I told him in the softest voice I could find that I had sold a few things, that I needed the cash. After all, if he was going to handle my finances, I needed to make sure I had some money on hand first. His face changed from pale to red with pure fury. He took a step toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son for what he truly was. Not the boy I had raised, not the young man I had helped build his life, but a stranger, someone who looked at me with contempt, with rage, with something that dangerously resembled hate. "You're crazy," he snapped. "You are completely out of your mind. How could you sell things without consulting me now? How are we supposed to watch TV when we come over? How are we going to be comfortable here?" That last sentence changed everything. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not how are you going to be comfortable, Dad? He wasn't worried about how this affected me, but about how they would be comfortable, as if my house were an extension of theirs, as if my possessions existed for their convenience. His wife stepped closer. She looked at me with those eyes that always seemed cold and calculating, and said something I will never forget. She said I was being selfish, that I was only thinking about myself, that they came every week to keep me company, to make sure I was doing well, and this was how I repaid them. Selfish. Me, the man who had worked double shifts for years so Malik could go to college. The man who had given up on rebuilding his life after his partner left us because he didn't want his son to grow up around a stranger. The man who had lived in small apartments, worn old clothes, and eaten the bare minimum so he could have everything he needed. Selfish. Malik stood there looking at me as if I were a problem he needed to solve. And then he said something that broke me in two. He said maybe it had been a mistake to propose the bank account transfer, that maybe I wasn't in any condition to make good decisions, that perhaps I needed more help than he thought. More help, as if I were a burden, an incapable elderly man who needed to be controlled. I stood up from my chair. I looked at both of them and told them in a voice that came out louder than I expected that dinner was not ready, that there was no dinner, and that if they were hungry, they could go eat somewhere else. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Malik stared at me as if he couldn't believe what he just heard. His wife let out a dry, bitter laugh and mumbled something about respect and gratitude. And then Malik spoke the final line, the one I still hear in my head when I close my eyes at night. He said with a coldness I'd never known him to possess, that I should be careful. A man my age alone, without family who truly cared about him, could end up in a bad way. He said he was the only thing I had, and I should remember that before doing anything stupid. They left. They stormed out of my house, slamming doors, leaving a trail of rage and veiled threats. I heard them get into the car, heard the engine start, and listened as they drove away. I stood there in my empty kitchen, in my empty house, feeling something inside me permanently shatter. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't desperation. It was something different. It was clarity. It was the absolute certainty that my son didn't love me, that perhaps he never had, that I was just a resource to him, a source of money, food, and convenience. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the bare walls of my living room. I looked at the empty spaces where furniture I'd bought with my labor and effort once stood. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled because Malik didn't know something. He didn't know I hadn't sold the furniture for money. I had sold it to send a message, to see how he would react, to confirm what I already suspected deep down in my heart. And he had reacted exactly as I expected, with rage, with indignation, with the attitude of someone who feels entitled to another person's things. That night, as I sat in the darkness of my empty house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Malik believe he had won. And then when he least expected it, when he was most confident, most sure of his control over me, I was going to show him who Leonard Leo Jackson truly was. Not the submissive father he thought he knew, but the man who had survived a broken home, poverty, and grueling hard work. The man who knew exactly how to protect himself. The man he should never have underestimated. There was a time when I believed being a father was enough, that the love I gave would be naturally returned, as if it were a universal law that the sacrifices I made every day would build something solid, something unbreakable between my son and me. How wrong I was. Malik was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. His mother, the woman who had promised me a life together, left when the boy was barely 2. She said she wasn't ready to be a mom, that she needed to find herself, and that I would understand someday. I never understood, but I also didn't wait for her to return. I was left alone with a small child, a 2-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, and a custodial job that paid $800 a month. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. So, I got a second job cleaning offices at night. I would leave Malik with my neighbor, Mrs. Ruth Henderson, an older lady who charged me $50 a week to watch him. I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening at the building. I'd come home, feed Malik, bathe him, put him to bed, and then head out again at 9 o'clock at night to clean until 2 o'clock in the morning. I slept 4 hours and started all over again. I did this for years, so many years that I lost count. I remember Malik always wanted the brand name sneakers the other kids at school wore. They cost $100. I earned maybe $1,200 a month between both jobs. $100 was almost all the money I had for groceries for 2 weeks, but I bought them for him. I didn't want my son to feel less than anyone else. I wanted him to know his father would do anything for him. I ate rice and beans for an entire month to pay for those sneakers. When Malik turned 18, he wanted to go to a private college that cost $10,000 a year. I didn't have that money. I didn't even have a tenth of that money. But I went to the bank and took out a loan. I went into debt for 4 full years of education, which I ended up paying off over 10 years. He graduated, got a good job. He earned $6,000 a month, double what I made after 30 years of working. And I was happy. I thought he could finally build his life. I thought I had finally done my job as a father well. But Malik didn't move out right away. He said he wanted to save money, that he wanted to have a solid base before becoming independent. I told him, "Of course, this is your home. You can stay as long as you need." He stayed 5 more years. 5 years where I kept working both my jobs. 5 years where I paid the rent, bought the food, and covered the utilities. 5 years where Malik saved every single penny of his salary because he didn't have to pay for anything. When he finally left, it wasn't to rent an apartment. It was to buy a house, a $300,000 house that he paid for in cash because he had saved all his money during those 5 years of living for free in my home. I was proud. I told him I was proud, and I was. I thought I had done well to help him. I thought that now that he had his own house, maybe he could help me. Maybe I could work less. Maybe I could rest a little. But that never happened. Malik got married 2 years after moving out. His wife was an elegant woman, one of those who always dressed well, always had perfect nails, and always spoke in a tone that sounded polite, but hid a certain coldness. I noticed from the start that she looked at me differently, as if I were somehow inferior, as if she didn't understand why Malik came from where he came from. At the wedding, which cost $30,000, I sat at a back table, not at the head table with the family. Malik explained it was because there were a lot of important people, clients from his work, and they needed those tables for them. I said I understood. I smiled in the photos, danced when asked, and went home alone that night, feeling strangely empty. After the wedding, Malik's visits became less frequent. Before, he came to see me 2 or 3 times a week. After he got married, he came once every 2 weeks, then once a month, always in a rush, always looking at his phone, always with some excuse to leave early. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the heavy father, the complaining father, the father who didn't understand his son had his own life now. But then they started coming on Friday nights, always around dinner time, always unannounced, always expecting me to have food ready. At first, I was delighted. I thought Malik finally wanted to spend time with me, that he finally missed me. So, I cooked his favorite dishes, set the table nicely, bought dessert. But I noticed something. I noticed Malik never came alone. He always brought his wife. And I noticed they never came to chat. They came to eat. They arrived, sat down, ate and left. Sometimes they stayed an hour, sometimes less. I also noticed he never brought anything. Never a bottle of wine, never a dessert, never money to help with the food, nothing. One night after they left, I calculated how much I had spent on the dinner. $15. Money I didn't have to spare. $15 meant I would have to work extra hours to compensate. And I realized something. I realized that for Malik, I had become a service, a free restaurant, a place where he could come to eat without paying, without even truly saying thank you. I began to notice other things, too. I noticed that when I asked him for help with something, he always had an excuse. When I needed him to take me to the doctor because my car was broken, he was always too busy. When I mentioned my refrigerator was making strange noises and I was afraid it would break soon, he told me to buy a new one, as if I had $500 saved for emergencies. I didn't. I barely had enough to make it to the end of the month. But the worst was my birthday, my 60th birthday. Malik arrived 2 hours late with no gift, no card, and an excuse about traffic. He stayed 20 minutes. He ate the cake I had bought for myself because I didn't want to spend the day alone. And then he left. I cried that night. I cried like I hadn't cried in years because I finally understood something I had been denying for too long. I understood that to my son I was no longer important. I was just a resource, something that was there, available, waiting to be used when he needed it. And the worst part was that I had allowed it. I had set that pattern. I had never asked him for anything. I had never told him I felt used. I had never told him I needed more from him than just 20-minute visits and Friday night dinners. I was afraid that if I complained, if I asked, if I demanded, he would disappear completely. And the idea of losing my son, even this son who barely saw me, terrified me more than anything else. So I continued being the convenient father, the silent father, the father who was always there, who always had the door open, who never caused trouble, until that Thursday afternoon, until Malik told me he wanted to manage my money. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for years, woke up. A small but clear voice that told me this wasn't right, that this was the beginning of something worse. But even then, even with that voice whispering in my head, I told him yes, because I still had hope. I still wanted to believe my son loved me, that he would protect me, that he would do the right thing. How foolish I was. The following Monday, Malik came to my house with papers. Lots of papers. He spread them out on the kitchen table, with that smile that now seemed different, less warm, more calculated. "Dad, this is simple," he said. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. These are the documents so I can have access to your account, so I can automatically transfer your salary every month. That way, I'll take care of paying your bills, managing everything. You won't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the papers. They were bank forms, authorization forms. I read the fine print, the parts people usually ignore, and I saw something that chilled my blood. It wasn't just access to my account. It was full power of attorney. It was the authority to make transfers, to close accounts, to make financial decisions on my behalf. "Malik, this says you'd have total control over my money," I told him. He nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yes, Dad. It's easier that way. That way I can handle everything without having to ask you for authorization every time. It's for practicality." Practicality? That word echoed in my head. Practicality for whom? I wondered, but I didn't say it out loud. I took the pen he offered me. I held it in my hand, and for a moment I was about to sign. I was about to give him everything because that's what I had always done. Trust, surrender, believe. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his face contorted in fury when he saw the empty house. I remembered his words. I remembered how he had threatened me, even though he probably didn't even realize it was a threat. I put the pen down on the table. "You know what, Malik? Give me a few days to think about it. I want to read everything calmly. I want to be sure." His expression changed for just a second. A flash of irritation crossed his face before he smiled again. "Dad, there's nothing to think about. It's simple. But okay, if you want to take a few days, that's fine." He left then, but he left the papers as if assuming I would eventually sign them anyway. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up looking at those papers on the kitchen table, and something inside me told me this was not for my good, that this was the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to reverse once it started. The next day, I went to the bank. I went early before my shift. I asked the teller to review my account, to show me all the transactions for the last 6 months. She printed the papers. They were several pages long. I reviewed them carefully, line by line, and then I saw it. I saw it, and I felt the floor move beneath my feet. There was a withdrawal I hadn't made. A withdrawal of $1,200 from 3 months ago. $1,200 that had left my account, and I didn't remember taking it out. I asked the teller if she could see more details. She checked her computer and told me something that took my breath away. She said the withdrawal had been made at a branch across town using my debit card, but I had never gone to that branch and my card was in my wallet. It had always been in my wallet, except for once. I remembered then. I remembered that 3 months ago, Malik had come to visit. I was in the shower when he arrived. I yelled for him to come in, that the door was open. When I came out, he was waiting for me in the living room. We sat down to chat, and at some point, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My wallet was in my bag. My bag was in the living room with Malik. I felt nauseated. I felt the whole world tilting strangely, because this could only mean one thing. It meant my son had taken my card, memorized or photographed the numbers, and withdrawn money from my account without my permission. I asked the teller if there was any way to know exactly what had happened with that withdrawal. She told me I needed to file a formal claim, that the bank would investigate, which could take several weeks. I told her I'd think about it, and I left the bank feeling like I no longer knew my own son. But I didn't file the claim. Not yet, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this had been just once or if there was more. I spent the next few days checking everything. Every piece of paper I had in my house, every document, every old bank statement I had kept in a box in my closet. And I found more things. I found that 2 years ago, when I was in the hospital with pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance for consultations I hadn't made, appointments at clinics I didn't know, consultations that had exhausted my annual coverage, which was why I had had to pay out of pocket for some medications that year. I also found a credit card in my name that I didn't remember applying for, a card with a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases I hadn't made at stores I'd never been to. I called the credit card company. I asked them when the account had been opened. They told me 18 months ago. I asked if they could tell me where the purchases had been made. They gave me a list. Hardware stores, electronics shops, home furnishing stores. Malik had bought a house 2 years ago. Malik had renovated that house, and apparently, Malik had used my credit to do it. I sat on the floor of my room, surrounded by papers, feeling everything I had believed about my life crumble. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. It was knowing my son had been robbing me for years, that he had viewed me as an unlimited resource, that he had never intended to care for or protect me. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I wiped my face, gathered all the papers, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I wasn't going to yell or accuse him because I knew if I did, he would deny everything. He'd say I was confused. He'd say I was senile. He'd say anything to make me doubt my own memory, my own sanity. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to gather evidence. I was going to document everything. I was going to build a case so solid he couldn't deny it. And then, only then, would I act. That Friday, Malik came back as always at dinner time, as always expecting me to have food ready. But this time, I had cooked differently. I had made his favorite dish, chicken and rice, the same meal I used to make when he was a boy and came home sad from school. The dish that told him how much I loved him without needing words. He sat at the table with his wife. They ate. They talked about superficial things, work, the weather, the new movie they wanted to see. I watched them. I watched them as if I were seeing them for the first time. And I realized something. I realized Malik ate my food with the same indifference he would eat fast food. There was no gratitude in his eyes, no love, just the mechanical act of eating something free. When they finished, Malik pulled out the bank papers again. He placed them on the table, right next to his empty plate. Dad, the days you asked for are up. You thought about it, right? Sign this, and I'll take care of everything. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him, in the calmest voice I could find, that I still wasn't sure, that I needed more time. His wife scoffed. Leo, this is ridiculous. Malik is just trying to help you. I don't understand why you're so distrustful. Distrustful. She called me distrustful. And the saddest part was she was right, but not in the way she thought. Malik stood up. His expression was hard now, without the mask of a smile. Dad, this is for your own good. You can't keep managing your finances alone. It's obvious. Look how you sold the furniture, without thinking. Look at the irrational decisions you're making. Irrational. Selling my own furniture in my own house was irrational, but robbing me for years wasn't. I didn't say anything. I just held his gaze until he looked away. They left that night without saying goodbye, and I stayed seated in my kitchen, staring at those unsigned papers, knowing the war was just beginning. A silent war, a war I had to win, because if I lost it, I wouldn't just lose my money. I would lose my dignity, my autonomy, my life. The days after that dinner grew strange. Malik didn't call again. He didn't visit again. It was as if he had decided to punish me with his absence, as if he believed I would break down without him, that I would beg him to return, that I would finally sign those papers just to get his attention back. But I didn't break down. For the first time in years, the silence of my house didn't feel empty. It felt full of something different. It felt full of clarity. I spent those days reviewing every detail of my financial life, every receipt I had saved, every bank statement, every piece of paper that had any connection to money. And the more I checked, the more I found. I discovered that 3 years ago, when Malik asked to borrow my ID because he had lost his and needed to pick up an urgent package, he had done something more with it. He had opened a utility account in my name at an address that wasn't mine, his house. For 3 years, the electricity bill for Malik's house had been in my name. And when he didn't pay on time, the penalties piled up on my credit score. That was why I had been denied a small loan last year when my car needed urgent repairs. That was why my credit score had mysteriously dropped. I called the utility company. I explained that the account wasn't mine, that I had never lived at that address. The woman on the phone told me I needed to file an affidavit, that I had to report this as identity fraud. Identity fraud committed by my own son. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time, trying to process how I had reached this point, trying to understand what my son had turned into this. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. And I thought about all the times I had justified his behavior, all the times I had told myself he was busy, that he had his own life, that I was being demanding by expecting more from him. But this wasn't about expectations. This was about theft, about deception, about a son who viewed his father as a resource he could exploit without consequence. The next morning, I did something I had never done. I went to see a lawyer. It was a small office downtown. The sign read Marcus Okoro, attorney at law. I had seen an ad for him in the paper offering free consultations. I walked in feeling small, feeling ridiculous, a man of 68 coming to complain about his own son. But the receptionist smiled kindly and showed me in. Mr. Okoro was a man in his 50s, with graying temples and kind eyes. He asked me to tell him everything, and I did. I told him about the missing money, the credit card I hadn't applied for, the utility account, the papers Malik wanted me to sign. He listened without interrupting. He took notes in a notepad, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "what you're describing is financial fraud and abuse of trust. If you sign those papers your son is asking for, you are giving him total legal access to your money. He could empty everything, and you would have no legal recourse because you gave him permission yourself." The words fell on me like stones. I knew it deep down. I knew it, but hearing it spoken aloud by a professional made it real in a different way. "What can I do?" I asked. He leaned forward. "First, don't sign anything. Second, report the credit card fraud and the theft from your bank account. Third, change all your passwords, your PIN, everything. Fourth, if you feel you are in danger, consider getting a restraining order." A restraining order against my own son. The idea seemed absurd and devastating at the same time. "I don't want to get him into legal trouble," I said. "He's my son." The lawyer looked at me with what looked like compassion and sadness. "Mr. Jackson, your son is already in legal trouble. He's committed several felonies. The question isn't whether you want to get him into trouble. The question is whether you want to protect yourself." I left that office with a folder full of forms and a list of things I needed to do. I felt overwhelmed, but I also felt something else, determination. I went straight to the bank. I changed all my passwords, requested a new debit card, closed a fraudulent credit card, and filed a formal dispute. The teller helped me with everything. She treated me with patience, without making me feel stupid or weak. When I arrived home that afternoon, I felt exhausted but also strangely light, as if an invisible weight I had been carrying for years had been lifted. That night, Malik finally called. His voice sounded strained on the phone. "Dad, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We have to resolve this." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. And before, I would have obeyed without question. But now, after everything I had discovered, I felt only a cold calm. "I can't tomorrow," I told him. "I'm busy." "Busy? Dad, what could you possibly be busy with?" "What I'm busy with is important to me," I said. "There are other things that matter more to me now." There was silence on the other end of the line. Silence heavy with surprise and irritation. "You're acting really weird, Dad. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you need to stop being so stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good." For my own good. Those words again, as if robbing me were an act of love. "Malik," I said, with a voice that came out firmer than I expected, "I am not signing anything. And I think we need to have a very serious conversation about a few things." "About what things?" he asked. His voice sounded different now, more alert, more cautious. "About money that has left my account without my permission. About credit cards I didn't apply for. About utility accounts in my name at addresses where I don't live." The silence that followed was absolute, so thick I could almost feel it through the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said. His voice sounded controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "I think you do know," I told him. "And I think you need to think very carefully about what you're going to say next." "Dad, you're delusional," he said quickly. "You're confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor." There it was, the card I knew he would play. The card of making me seem senile, confused, incapable. I'm not confused, Malik. I have all the papers. I have all the evidence. And I've already spoken with a lawyer. Another silence, this one longer, heavier. You talked to a lawyer? His voice was almost a whisper now, almost a threat. Yes. And he explained to me exactly what you've been doing. He explained what fraud is. He explained what is illegal. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I've done has been to help you. Help me, Malik. You robbed me for years. You used me. You lied to me. I never, he started, but I cut him off. Yes, you did. And you know it. The question now is what we're going to do about it. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line. Heavy, ragged. I'm coming over, he said. We need to talk in person. No, I told him. You're not coming here. If you want to talk, we can do it over the phone, or we can do it with lawyers present. Are you crazy? He yelled. Completely crazy? After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've come to see you, after all the times I've worried about you, this is how you repay me? All the times you came to eat for free, you mean? I said, all the times you needed something from me. But the times I needed you, where were you? I hung up before he could answer, before he could twist the conversation into guilt or confusion, before he could manipulate me again with words. I sat there in my kitchen, the phone still in my hand, trembling, not from fear, but from rage, from years and years of suppressed rage, finally finding its voice. I slept better that night than I had in months, because I had finally spoken the truth. I had finally defended my own ground, and though I didn't know what would come next, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer going to be the silent father who allowed himself to be trampled. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if a thick fog had lifted from my mind, and now I could see everything with painful sharpness. I knew what I had to do. I knew I couldn't stop now. After breakfast, I grabbed my old leather satchel and left the house. I had a mental list of all the places I needed to visit, all the loose ends I needed to tie up. If Malik thought I was a confused, helpless old man, he was about to find out how wrong he was. My first stop was the main bank, where I kept my savings account. Not the checking account where I received my small pension, but the other one. The one I had opened 30 years ago when I still dreamed of buying my own home someday. I had $20,000 saved there. It wasn't much after a lifetime of work, but it was mine. I asked the manager to close the account. She looked surprised and asked if there was a problem. I told her I just wanted to make some changes. She gave me the money in a cashier's check and recommended I open an account at another bank for greater security. I followed her advice. I went to a different bank across town, one where Malik had never been with me, and opened a new account. An account only I knew about. An account he could never find. Then I went to the utility company. I presented all the documents that Attorney Okoro had helped me prepare. The affidavit, the copy of my ID, the proof that I had never lived at the address where the account was registered. The woman who assisted me checked everything carefully and told me they would start an investigation, that the account would be transferred to the correct name or closed, and that I would no longer be responsible. I felt as if an invisible chain had been lifted from my shoulders. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a full report of my history. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to know if there were more things Malik had done behind my back. The employee gave me a thick document. I sat in the waiting room and read it page by page. And then I found it. Another thing I didn't know about. A personal loan of $5,000, applied for in my name 2 years ago. A loan that had never been fully paid and was now in collections. $5,000. I felt the rage rise back up my throat like bile. I marked every fraudulent item with a highlighter. I filled out the dispute forms one by one with clear, steady handwriting. When I left that office, it was nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but I wasn't hungry. I had something stronger than hunger. I had purpose. Then I went to see my neighbor, Mrs. Ruth Henderson. She was 70 years old and had lived in the building longer than I had. We'd been friends for decades, though we had grown distant over the last few years. I had been so consumed with Malik, so focused on trying to maintain that fragile relationship, that I had neglected everyone else. I knocked on her door. She opened it, surprise flashing in her kind brown eyes. "Leo, what a surprise. Come in, come in." We went into her small but cozy living room. She offered me coffee, and I accepted. We sat down, and she looked at me with that knowing expression only old souls have. "You look different," she said. "I don't know what it is, but there's something in your eyes, something strong." And then I told her everything. I told her about Malik, about the money, the lies, the betrayal, everything I had discovered. I spoke for almost an hour without stopping, and she listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally with a look that mixed sadness and a kind of quiet understanding. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Leo, I knew something wasn't right," she said softly. "I saw it every Friday when he came, the way he treated you, like you were just a service. But I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place. I'm glad you're finally seeing the truth." She took my hand. Her fingers were cool but firm. "I need to ask you a favor," I said. "I need you to be my witness. If Malik comes here and tries to say I'm confused or losing my mind, I need you to confirm that's not true, that I'm fully in control of my faculties." She nodded without hesitation. "Of course. And more than that, if you ever don't feel safe in your house, my door is open." Those words filled me with such deep gratitude that they almost brought me to tears, but I didn't cry. I had cried enough. Now it was time to act. That night, back in my house, I organized all the documents I had collected. I put them in a large folder. I made copies of everything, stored the originals in a safe place, and left the copies in the folder. If something happened to me, if Malik tried to do anything, there would be evidence. There would be proof. I also wrote a letter, a detailed letter explaining everything I had discovered, everything Malik had done. I put it in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it only in case of emergency. I gave it to Mrs. Henderson to keep safe. I was preparing myself like a soldier before battle, because I knew Malik wasn't going to let this go. I knew he would come. I knew he would try to manipulate me, to convince me, to make me doubt myself. But I was no longer the same man I had been 2 weeks ago. That man had died the night Malik threatened me in my own kitchen. The man I was now was different, stronger, clearer, more determined. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was making tea, I heard a car stop in front of my building. I looked out the window and saw Malik's car. He got out, his wife by his side. They looked determined. They were coming to confront me. I took a deep breath, put down my cup of tea, and waited. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times, each time louder, more insistent. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. I stood on the threshold, blocking the entrance. "We need to talk," Malik said, his voice hard, stripped of any pretense of kindness. "I'm listening," I said. "Inside, Dad. We're not going to talk in the hallway. We don't have anything to talk about inside. Whatever you have to say it here." His wife scoffed. "This is ridiculous, Leo. Stop acting like we're enemies." "You're not enemies," I replied. "Enemies are honest about their hostility. You're worse. You're thieves hiding behind polite words." Malik took a step toward me, his face red with fury. "How dare you," he spat. "After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done for me, Malik?" I said evenly. "I have the records. I have the proof. I know exactly how much money you've taken from me. I know about the fraudulent credit cards. I know about the utility account. I know about everything." He froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "And now," I continued, with a calmness that surprised even me, "you have 2 options. Either you give me back everything you stole, every cent, or I go to the police and press charges for fraud." "You can't do that," his wife said quickly, stepping forward. "He's your son." "Precisely why it hurt so much," I replied. "Because he is my son. Because I gave him everything, and he repaid me by robbing me." Malik finally found his voice. "You owe me," he shouted. "My whole life. I grew up without a father. My whole life. I had to watch you work yourself to death. That was your fault. You chose that life, not me. You chose to have me. I didn't ask to be born." His words hit me like fists, but they didn't hurt the way they used to. I could see them now for what they were, deflections, excuses from someone who couldn't face the truth. "You're right," I said quietly. "I chose to have you. And for a long time, it was the best decision of my life. But that doesn't give you the right to steal from me. That doesn't give you the right to exploit me." "I didn't steal anything," he yelled. "I just took what was owed to me." "Nothing was owed to you, Malik. I gave you everything you needed when you were a child. Once you became an adult, it was no longer my responsibility. And it was definitely not my obligation to give you access to my money behind my back." His wife tugged at his arm. "Let's go," she muttered. "She's lost. It's not worth it." "Lost," I repeated softly. What an interesting choice of words. As if I'm the one who's wrong. As if defending my dignity and my savings is madness. They turned and walked down the stairs, not looking back. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, before closing it quietly. That night, my lawyer, Mr. Okoro, called. He told me the banks had confirmed the fraud, that the credit card debt would be canceled, that they were investigating the unauthorized withdrawals, and that I had a solid case if I decided to press criminal charges. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my empty living room, no television, no fancy furniture, just quiet space and my thoughts. And for the first time in a long time, I felt rich. Rich in something money couldn't buy: dignity, strength, the certainty that I was doing the right thing. The days following that confrontation were strangely silent. It was as though the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I found myself in a kind of emotional limbo where anger and pain mixed with a deep, growing sense of freedom. Malik didn't call. He didn't show up. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him. I wasn't checking my phone, hoping for a message, inventing excuses to justify his silence. But even though he wasn't physically around, his presence haunted me in a different way. Something inside me urged me to look at his social media accounts, something I'd never done before, because it always felt like an intrusion. But now I needed to see what he was doing, what he was saying. What I found took my breath away. He had posted a photo the day after our confrontation, a picture of him and his wife at a fancy restaurant, smiling, wine glasses raised. The caption read, "Celebrating the release of toxic energy. Surround yourself only with those who add value to your life." As if I were the toxic energy he needed to remove. As if my refusal to let him steal from me was some kind of negativity he'd heroically escaped. The comments under the post were glowing. People congratulating him for protecting his peace, for setting boundaries, for choosing self-care. I sat staring at the screen, a mix of disbelief and disgust swirling in me. Those people had no idea that the man they were praising had been stealing from his own father for years. The next few posts were worse. There was one of him at the gym, captioned with a self-help quote about investing in yourself before you can help others. The irony was sickening. He had invested in himself, all right, with stolen money. Another post showed him working on his laptop, writing about the grind and the sacrifice it takes to build success. Reading that, I could almost laugh if it hadn't hurt so much. His success had been built on lies, on my name, my credit, my years of toil. But the post that truly broke me came that Friday, the day he used to come to my house for dinner. It was a photo of me and him when he was about 5 years old. I was holding him, smiling, the way fathers do when they believe their love will be enough. The caption read, "Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." I've learned that love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Sometimes you have to let go of toxic family relationships for your mental health. Reading those words felt like being punched in the gut. My son had taken our story, our real, painful, complicated truth, and twisted it into a lie where he was the victim. The comments flooded in, strangers and old acquaintances alike, calling him brave, strong, mature. People saying they were proud of him for breaking the cycle of toxicity. There were even people I knew, neighbors, old friends, leaving messages of support, completely unaware that the man they were comforting was a thief, a manipulator, a liar. For days, I said nothing. I watched it all unfold from behind my screen in silence. I knew what he was doing, shaping a narrative, controlling the story before the truth could surface. If I reacted, if I lashed out publicly, I'd only feed his lie. He'd use it as proof that I was unstable, the crazy old man who couldn't let go. Still, every new post cut deeper. Not because I cared what strangers thought of me, but because I couldn't stand seeing him distort reality so easily, seeing him perform goodness for an audience that believed every word. Then came another story, a video tour of his house. The new furniture, the remodeled kitchen, the manicured garden, every detail gleaming with pride. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." Nothing like building something from the ground up with your own hands. There wasn't a single mention of how that hard work had been financed, by stolen credit, by fraud, by my sacrifices. I stared at the screen, feeling something in me harden, because seeing Malik not only steal from me, but also steal my story, turning himself into the noble son who'd overcome a cruel, bitter father, made me realize something I had refused to see before. There was no redemption here. No apology would ever undo this. He had chosen his path, the lie over the truth, image over integrity, and I had to accept that the son I'd loved had either never truly existed or had disappeared long ago, replaced by a stranger who could smile for the camera while destroying me in private. From that moment on, I stopped hoping. I stopped imagining any reconciliation. I stopped thinking of him as my son. The love I'd felt for 34 years didn't vanish. It simply transformed into something else, resolve. Because if Malik could rewrite the story publicly, then I would make sure the real story was written in ink and law. The moment came one Tuesday afternoon in a way I hadn't planned, but that in hindsight felt inevitable, because the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how many lies are stacked on top of it. I was in Attorney Okoro's office, reviewing the final case documents, when he told me the banks had completed their investigations. They had confirmed a total of $17,000 in fraudulent transactions over the course of 3 years. The number took my breath away, not just for its size, but for what it meant. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an impulsive act of desperation. It was deliberate, sustained, and methodical. Malik hadn't just taken from me. He had planned it. Every withdrawal, every fraudulent account, every signature forged in my name. It had all been part of a long, calculated operation. Mr. Okoro looked at me across the desk. With this evidence, you have more than enough to press criminal charges. But before we take that step, there's another option you may want to consider. What kind of option? I asked cautiously. He explained that I could send Malik a formal demand letter, a chance to repay what he owed and avoid the courts. It's a courtesy we sometimes offer in family-related fraud cases, he said gently. Some parents prefer to give their children one last opportunity to make things right before the law steps in. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the thick pile of evidence spread before me. Bank statements, transaction histories, digital records, notarized documents, all proof that my own son had stolen from me again and again. Part of me wanted to believe that, if confronted with undeniable evidence, something in him would awaken. Maybe guilt, maybe shame, maybe even the faint echo of the love he once had for me. That part of me, the father who still wanted to believe in his son, wanted to give him a chance. But another part, the one that had grown sharper and wiser through betrayal, knew exactly what he would do with that opportunity. He wouldn't take it as mercy. He'd take it as weakness. I could already see it. Malik would twist the story, claim I was confused, manipulate the situation until somehow he looked like the victim again. And I refused to give him that power. I don't want to send a letter, I said finally, my voice steady. If I reach out to him privately, he'll use that time to prepare, to hide evidence, to build more lies. No, I want this to be public. I want the truth on record. Okoro studied me for a moment, then nodded with quiet respect. Then we'll proceed with a formal civil lawsuit. Once it's filed, it becomes public record. Anyone who wants to know the truth will be able to see it for themselves. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. He promised to prepare the paperwork immediately. When I left his office that day, the air outside felt different, crisper, cleaner somehow. For the first time in years, I felt power coursing quietly through me. The kind of power that comes not from anger, but from conviction. I had spent a lifetime protecting others, my son, my pride, my family's image. But this was the first time I was protecting myself. And it felt right. 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, Mr. Okoro called to tell me Malik had officially been served with a lawsuit. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture it vividly. The look of shock as he opened that envelope, reading the words that detailed every lie, every theft, every fraudulent act, down to the dollar and date. For 2 hours, my phone rang nonstop. Malik called again and again. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already in those documents. That night, when I finally gathered the courage to listen to his voicemails, I heard a full display of his unraveling. The first message was calm, almost rehearsed. "Dad, this must be some kind of mistake. Let's talk before this gets out of hand." The second was more urgent. "Dad, please, don't do this. This could ruin my life. You don't understand what you're doing." By the fourth message, his composure was gone. "You're going to regret this, old man. You've lost it. You're making a fool of yourself. I have lawyers too, and they're going to prove you're senile and don't know what you're signing. You think anyone's going to believe you?" I listened to every message to the end, not out of curiosity, but with a detached sort of fascination. It was like watching a man drown in the same waters he thought he could control. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motion. Malik had hired lawyers, of course, and they launched their own counterattack, publicly painting me as unstable, claiming I was being manipulated by others into attacking my son. Then came his social media statement, written in the polished language of public relations, no doubt crafted by someone he'd paid. He spoke vaguely about being betrayed by someone close, who was struggling with age-related confusion. He never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew. Dozens of comments poured in, offering sympathy and praise. "Stay strong, brother," they said. "Family can be cruel. You're doing the right thing, protecting your peace." I read every comment without flinching. The anger I'd once felt had cooled into something stronger: clarity. I knew the truth, and unlike his followers, I had the documents to prove it. Malik's carefully curated image began to crack when his own lawyers faced the evidence. Mr. Okoro told me that during their discovery phase, they realized there was no way to disprove what we had. The fraudulent accounts, the digital signatures, the money trails, they all pointed to Malik. Suddenly, his social media went silent. The endless stream of self-righteous posts stopped overnight. A week later, Okoro called with news. His legal team reached out. They wanted to discuss a settlement. That was when I knew I had truly won. Not because I wanted the money back, but because he had no more lies left to tell. Rumors started spreading through our old neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson heard them first. Neighbors who once bragged about Malik's success now whispered about the lawsuit, about the fraud. His spotless reputation had started to crumble. Even his wife, from what I heard, was furious, not about the crimes, but about the embarrassment. She couldn't stand the whispers, the judgment, the pity. Over the following weeks, Malik tried calling me several more times. I didn't answer. My silence, I think, destroyed him more than my anger ever could, because silence meant indifference, and indifference meant the power had shifted. 3 months after the lawsuit began, the settlement was finalized. The terms were exactly as Mr. Okoro and I had agreed. Malik was to repay the full $17,000, plus an additional $5,000 in damages, as well as all legal and credit repair fees. But there was one clause I insisted on adding, a clause that Okoro initially thought unnecessary, but I refused to remove. Malik had to issue a public statement admitting that he had committed financial fraud against his father, and that the claims in the lawsuit were true. He fought that clause harder than any other, but he had no leverage left. He signed. When the statement appeared on his social media a week later, it was brief, clearly written by his lawyers to minimize damage. But the truth was there for all to see, that he had accessed accounts without permission, opened credit in someone else's name, and made serious errors in judgment. The comments that followed were a storm. The same people who had praised him for his strength now turned on him, shock, disappointment, disbelief flooding his page. Some people defended him weakly, most didn't. I read it all with quiet detachment. It wasn't joy I felt, not revenge, just peace. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and that was enough. The first repayment hit my new bank account, exactly on time. Every month after that, another deposit followed, punctual and precise. Malik knew missing even one would mean criminal prosecution. But the money wasn't the victory. The real victory was freedom, the quiet, unshakable peace that comes from knowing I had reclaimed my name, my dignity, my life. And I wasn't done yet. I had plans, ones that had nothing to do with Malik or revenge, but everything to do with finally living for myself. With each payment Malik made, I felt a chapter of my old life closing. Month after month, the deposits arrived right on schedule, cold, mechanical, stripped of the warmth that once connected us. Each transaction wasn't just money being returned. It was a reminder of every boundary I had allowed him to cross, and every piece of myself I was now reclaiming. After the fourth payment, Mr. Okoro called to confirm that all terms were being honored. His tone was lighter, almost cheerful, but I could tell he was careful not to sound patronizing. "Mr. Turner," he said, "it seems your son has realized that this isn't a situation he can manipulate. You've done the right thing." The right thing. Those words stayed with me. They didn't feel triumphant, just steady, solid, true. For years, I had confused being a good father with being endlessly forgiving, endlessly giving. But standing up for myself didn't make me a bad father. It made me a man again, a man who had finally drawn a line. By the sixth payment, I had already decided what to do once everything was settled. I wasn't going to simply sit in that same small apartment, surrounded by ghosts of past arguments and memories of dinners that had long turned cold. I was ready to start over, somewhere quiet, somewhere by the water, somewhere that didn't hold echoes of Malik's voice. The last payment arrived on a warm Friday morning. It came with a short, impersonal message from Malik's lawyer, confirming that all financial obligations had been fulfilled. I looked at the number on the screen and waited for some sense of closure, some spark of satisfaction. But what I felt instead was calm, deep and unwavering. That afternoon, I went online and booked a plane ticket to a coastal town 3 hours away, a small place called Belle Harbor. I'd read about it years ago in a magazine, a quiet community with long stretches of beach and small colorful houses lined along the dunes. I bought a modest 2-bedroom house with a garden, paying in cash with a combination of the settlement money and my savings. It wasn't a mansion, not by any measure, but it was mine, earned, reclaimed, and untarnished by lies. When I signed the closing documents, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot that had been tightening for decades, finally giving way. This wasn't just a move. It was a rebirth. I spent the next few weeks preparing. I sold what few possessions I still had left, my worn couch, my old bed frame, a few kitchen appliances. I packed what really mattered, my late wife's Bible, a few photographs, some books, my old guitar that I hadn't touched in years. The rest I left behind without regret. Mrs. Henderson helped me pack. She moved slower these days, but her spirit was as sharp as ever. "You're finally doing something for yourself, Leo," she said, folding one of my shirts with the care of an old friend who had seen me through too much. "You've spent your whole life giving. It's about time you learn to receive." I smiled. "Maybe I'm not learning to receive," I said. "Maybe I'm just learning to stop giving to the wrong people." She chuckled softly, but her eyes glistened. Before I left, I handed her an envelope, the same one she had kept safe from me when all this began. Inside it was the letter I had written months ago, the one detailing everything Malik had done. "You can destroy it now," I told her. "I don't need it anymore." She nodded and hugged me tightly. "You're free now, Leo. Don't forget that." The drive to Belle Harbor was long but peaceful. As the miles stretched out, the city slowly disappeared behind me, its noise, its tension, its memories fading into the rearview mirror. The landscape opened into rolling fields, then dunes, then the vast glimmering line of the ocean. When I arrived at my new home, the air smelled of salt and pine. The small house stood on a quiet street, painted a soft blue that reminded me of calm waters. The first night, I slept on a simple mattress on the floor, listening to the waves crashing in the distance. It was the most restful sleep I'd had in years. In the mornings, I began to build a routine. I brewed coffee and sat by the garden window, watching sunlight spill over the flowers I'd planted. Lilies, marigolds, and blue hydrangeas, colors that spoke of new beginnings. Sometimes I'd take long walks on the beach, feeling the sand between my toes, the wind brushing against my skin like a benediction. There were still moments when the past tried to creep in, memories of Malik as a little boy running through the park, his laughter bright and unbroken by resentment. But those moments didn't hurt as much anymore. They felt like old photographs, distant, faded, no longer capable of wounding me. A month after I moved, I received a call. The number was familiar, Malik's. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps closure, made me answer. His voice sounded smaller, strained. "Dad," he said. There was a pause, as if he were testing the word on his tongue, unsure whether it still belonged to him. "Can we talk?" "I'm listening," I said quietly. "I know I've done wrong," he continued. "I know I messed up. I've been going to therapy, trying to figure things out. He stopped, his voice cracking. "I just want to know if there's any way we can start over. Maybe one day." I let the silence stretch between us. I could hear the ocean outside, the gentle rhythm of the waves. "Malik," I said finally. "The son I raised, he either never existed or he died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone I don't recognize. I wish you peace, truly. But I've closed that door. Not out of hate, out of self-respect." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and then nothing. A long silence, followed by what might have been a quiet sob, or maybe just breathing. Then the line went dead. That was the last time I heard his voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was acceptance, pure and clean. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay closed, not as punishment, but as protection. Now my days pass softly. I wake up when my body tells me to, not when an alarm insists. I cook meals I like, not worrying about someone else's preferences. I spend my afternoons reading books I always meant to finish, and my evenings sitting on the porch, the sea breeze against my face, watching the sunset turn the horizon gold and crimson. Sometimes Mrs. Henderson calls me. She still lives in the same old building and loves to tell me the neighborhood gossip. Every time, she says the same thing. "You sound different, Leo. Lighter, happier." And she's right. I am lighter. I am happier. Because I finally understood something that took me 7 decades to learn. That real love, whether it's for your child, your spouse, or yourself, cannot exist where there is exploitation. Love without respect isn't love. It's dependence. And dependence will always eat away at your soul until there's nothing left of you but silence and regret. I didn't win by punishing Malik. I won by freeing myself from the endless cycle of guilt and forgiveness. I won by choosing peace over pain. Every morning when I sip my coffee and watch the flowers sway in the breeze, I think, this is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, but still and steady, like the tide. The old Leo Turner is gone. The man who let others take without question, who believed that being needed was the same as being loved, that man has been laid to rest. The one who remains is content, grounded, and finally whole. Now I live in my small house by the sea, and every morning feels like a quiet prayer. I wake before sunrise, make myself a cup of coffee, and sit on the porch, watching the first light touch the ocean. The world seems reborn each day, and in that stillness, I find something I never truly had before: peace. It's strange how life can turn in circles. For years, everything I did was about survival. Every paycheck went toward bills. Every hour of rest was stolen by exhaustion, and every dream was postponed until someday. I thought that was love, sacrifice without limits. But sitting here now, surrounded by nothing but the sound of waves and birds, I finally understand that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's surrender. My garden has become my sanctuary. I planted roses, marigolds, and lavender along the fence line. Some mornings, I spend hours tending to them, trimming, watering, speaking softly to each bloom, as if they could hear me. Maybe they can. Nature listens in a way people often don't. The rhythm of growth and decay, of blossoms and roots, reminds me that healing takes time, and that even after being cut down, something can grow again stronger than before. Once a week, I drive into the small town nearby. Bell Harbor isn't fancy, but it has everything I need. A grocery store, a cafe with good cornbread, a library that smells like old wood and salt air. The folks, they're friendly in that coastal way, greeting you with a nod and a smile without prying too much into your past. They call me Mr. Turner, or sometimes Old Leo. I like that. It fits. There's a little diner on Main Street where I've become something of a regular. The waitress, a young woman named Tasha, always brings me an extra biscuit without charging for it. You remind me of my granddad, she says. He used to sit right where you are now, reading the paper like the world couldn't rush him if it tried. I smile every time she says it because she's right. The world can't rush me anymore. I move at my own pace now. Sometimes, when I'm sitting there, I see families come in, fathers with their sons, mothers with their daughters. I watch them without bitterness. I don't envy them. I simply hope they know what they have before it's gone. I used to think Malik and I would have been one of those families, sharing jokes over pancakes, trading stories, laughing about the past. But that was another life, another dream. Now, I don't live in dreams. I live in truth. Every month, on the same day, I still receive Malik's payments. They come like clockwork, always on time, always with the same mechanical note from his lawyer confirming the transfer. I don't even read them anymore. The money isn't the point. It never was. After the final payment came, 6 months to the day from the settlement, I knew the cycle had ended. I was free, not just legally, but spiritually. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun dip behind the waves. The air smelled of salt and memory. I thought about Malik, about the boy who used to climb into my lap to show me his drawings, the teenager who once hugged me after his high school graduation, the young man who promised he'd make me proud. Somewhere along the way, that boy vanished, replaced by a man I couldn't recognize. Maybe life did that to him. Maybe I did. Or maybe he was always there, and I just didn't want to see it. But as I sat there, the sadness didn't feel heavy anymore. It was soft, like the tide coming in and out, something that would always be there, but no longer strong enough to drown me. A few days later, I received a letter. It wasn't from Malik, it was from his wife, Simone. The handwriting was delicate, almost hesitant. Mr. Turner, it began. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect understanding. But I wanted you to know that Malik has started volunteering at a community shelter in the city. I think what happened between you changed him. Maybe not enough, maybe too late, but it did something. He doesn't talk about it, but I can see it. He's quieter now. I thought you should know. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it inside my wife's old Bible. I didn't know whether to believe it, and perhaps that didn't matter. If Malik was trying to change, that was his journey. Mine had already begun long ago. From time to time, Mrs. Henderson calls to check on me. Her voice always warms me, even through the distance. "Leo, you sound different," she says. "Like you've let go of something big." "I have," I tell her. "I've let go of everything that wasn't mine to carry." She laughs softly, the sound of wisdom earned through decades of living. That's the trick, isn't it? Knowing what's yours and what's not. The seasons have started to shift again. The air is cooler in the mornings, and the sea looks darker, deeper. Sometimes I walk to the pier and watch the fishermen cast their nets at dawn. There's something honest about that life. No illusions, no performances, just patience and work and trust in what the sea will give back. I often think of that in relation to life itself. You cast what you can into the world, your effort, your love, your time, and hope it returns something of value. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the sea keeps everything you've thrown in. And when that happens, you learn to find peace not in what you receive, but in the act of giving itself. I've started writing again. Little essays, reflections, stories. Sometimes about my life, sometimes about others. There's a small writing group at the Bell Harbor Library that meets on Wednesdays. Most of the members are retirees like me. Teachers, nurses, a former jazz musician named Ernest who still hums Coltrane under his breath. They told me I have a storyteller's voice. That made me smile. One of my essays was about forgiveness, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that releases you from it. I read it aloud one evening, my hands trembling slightly, my voice steady. When I finished, there was silence in the room, the good kind, the kind that means someone has really listened. Afterward, Ernest clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You've lived a hell of a life, Leo. Most folks go through their whole time on Earth without ever waking up. But you woke up." And maybe that's true. In the end, my story isn't about loss. It's about awakening, about realizing that being a parent doesn't mean being a martyr, that love doesn't mean erasing yourself. It's about learning that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you reclaim the moment you stop letting others take it from you. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still think about Malik. I wonder where he is, whether he's sleeping well, whether he's found peace in his own way. But those thoughts come and go like waves, never staying long enough to hurt. Now, when people ask if I have children, I simply smile and say, "I used to." It's not bitterness. It's truth. I end each day the same way, sitting on my porch as the sky turns shades of purple and gold, the sea humming softly like an old song. I watch the light fade and whisper a simple prayer of gratitude for the roof above me, for the quiet inside me, for the strength it took to save myself. This is my victory, not in the money recovered or in Malik's public admission, but in the man I became through the fire. I learned that saying no can be the loudest act of love there is. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They're doors that open inward, protecting the sacred space of your soul. And most of all, I learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build slowly, stubbornly, one decision at a time. So, as I sit here tonight, watching the last glimmer of sunlight sink into the sea, I know that I am exactly where I'm meant to be. Free, whole, and finally home.